Welcome back to the How to Play Your Role in a Trio series, and in this video I'll be talking about the role known as support. Here are the timestamps for the video if you do want to skip around, but I would highly suggest watching the whole thing. The first thing I want to address before I start off this video is that the support player is not necessarily your worst player. A lot of players, when I tell them that they should play support, assume that I'm calling them bad, when in reality support is a very necessary role in a trio. Real quick before I do start the video, I do want to say thank you to everybody who had so much positive feedback on my last video, which was how to play IGL. I had tons of DMs, and I just want to thank everybody who DM'd me. Even my old duo partner, who absolutely freaking hates me. There's DMs on the screen from him right now. He said that was a great video, and it really helped him out. So if it helped him out, and he was able to admit it, I'm sure it'll help you out too. I don't want to waste too much of your time though, so let's start the video with what loot you should carry. The first thing that a support player should always be carrying is a harpoon. A harpoon is by far the most valuable thing you can carry in an endgame, and it's very important that your support player carries it. The reason you want your support player to carry it is if your fragger is out getting kills, you want your support player to be able to loot them from a distance, so your fragger doesn't have to focus on loot and can instead keep focusing on getting kills. The other reason you want your support player to have a harpoon is so that your IGL doesn't have to focus on looting, and he can instead focus on where the zone goes and what the terrain is. The next two slots in a support player's inventory should either be filled with a bandage cannon or two different meds. The reason a bandage cannon is great is because you can heal teammates from a distance if they need it. It's also great because your IGL will constantly be taking a couple ticks of storm in order to lengthen your tunnel or get better positioning, so having a bandage cannon that recharges helps keep your IGL at 100 health. If you can't find a bandage cannon, that is totally fine. Then I would give your support player the slow heals like full pots and medkits. If you drop somewhere where you can get a minigun or you kill a player with a minigun, it is an absolute must that your support player carries it. In a game mode like trios and squads, if you have a player with a minigun who's constantly able to pressure your opponents, he will A, waste their mats, and B, make them constantly distracted while you're fighting them. If you 2v1 a player, while one player sprays a minigun and the other one hops into his box with attack, that player has absolutely zero chance of surviving. So a minigun is a great tool for getting that first kill in a fight. If you don't find a minigun, then carry an AR where you would have carried a minigun, and in your final slot, take a shotgun of your choice. That's the loot a support player should carry, so now let's hop into their role at a drop spot. While you are gliding in as a support player, the first thing you should do is keep track of where enemies are dropping nearby to your drop spot. This way, if for some reason your IGL doesn't feel that you can contest your current drop spot, you know where you can go for extra loot. Even if you don't decide to disengage and you do end up pulling zone, it does let you know other spots that you can loot after you loot your own drop spot. Finally, if you happen to have to rotate halfway across the map, it's super helpful to know where enemies are, so you know how to avoid them so you don't end up fighting them during the mid-game. Once you have landed, it's your job to try and get the fragger a shotgun so that you guys can work together and get the first kill on the opposing trio. For my trio, we drop at the shark, and our rule of thumb is as soon as we've wiped every team at shark, the second we find a harpoon, we give it to our support and he goes to fish. This isn't 100% necessary, but it's something that works for us, and I would suggest that you do if you have a spot where you can fish. That's a support's role during early game, so now let's hop into their role during the first 4 zones. During mid-game, your main role as a support player is to sit behind the trio as they rotate and make sure nobody's coming up behind you. This will prevent your team from getting flanked and prevent your team from getting easily eliminated. Make sure you're not too far away from your trio though, because this will make you and your teammates an easy elimination. Instead, I'd say about 4 or 5 tiles away from your fragger is just fine. Yes, Landon, I'm talking about you right now. You don't want to be 150 yards away from your team during mid-game. Also, make sure that you're not over-communicating because you want your IGL to be the main voice in your trio at this time. If you do end up getting into a fight during mid-game, your role as a support player is to make sure that you're looking for 2v1s with your teammates. Do not get balls deep into a fight. You do not want to be shotgun fighting as a support player. Instead, sit back with your minigun or AR and pressure the opponents as much as you can. If a teammate does get beamed, make sure you give them some of your meds or build for them while they pop some of their own. If a teammate does get weak or go down, that is when you start to engage into the fight and get a little bit more involved. If a teammate does get downed, try and make sure they don't get finished, and later in the fight, if you feel it's safe, try and res them. Because you're playing a little bit further back in the fight, you can see what's happening better, and this is why you want to make sure you're the one calming for your teammates at this time. This is one of the few times in the game that a support player has the floor to talk over the IGL. The types of things you should be communicating is when your team should take height, when your team should drop, or when your team should try and 2v1 opponents. You also want to try and keep track of where enemies are, and if you see one backing off the heal, you want to pressure them as much as possible. Usually if you're keeping track of the enemies well enough, it's pretty easy to tell when they're about to 2v1 one of your teammates, so make sure you're calming to them when that's about to happen. If you do see one of your teammates getting 2v1, that is another time that you should get a little bit more involved in the fight. That's about it for mid-game, so now let's hop into endgame. The most important job of a support player during endgame is to make sure that you're blocking off the back of your tarp. I'm sure you guys have had it before where you're just tarping in and then all of a sudden there's another player in the back of your tarp and every single player on your team gets beamed and you're all 1 HP. This is what your support player is trying to avoid, so he's sitting in the back of the tarp, blocking stuff off, and also making sure nobody is pickaxing their way into your tarp. Your next job is to make sure that you're looting the fragger's kills. If your fragger is fragging out and getting a ton of kills, you want to make sure that you're not stopping this and letting him go and get more kills while you loot for him. While you're looting, look for things like purple and gold pumps and make sure you call the fragger over to get them. The next thing you want to do is go and give all of your hard mats to the IGL while you go and replenish from the kills. If you are really far into the late game, you may want to drop things like your harpoon or bandage gun for things like fish. And if the fragger did get kills out of your reach of looting, make sure you use your harpoon to get as much of the loot as you can. The most important thing you want to do is make sure none of those mats go to waste. Your next job as a support player is to make sure that your IGL always has mats. If your IGL is ever calling for mats, make sure your next priority is to get to him and split you everything you have. Please do not be greedy with this. You want to make sure that your IGL has more mats than you at all times. Finally, if your team does need an impact frag, you should look for one at a distance while the fragger is looking to hop into somebody's box. If you see a player out in the open or a loot pile out in the open, try and kill them and harpoon all the loot that you can. This is one of the best and safest ways to get an impact frag. Overall, that is your job in endgame as a support player, so now let's hop into some more specific situations. If your team has height, I would suggest that your support player plays ultimate height. The reason you want a player at ultimate height is if your other teammates get contested, you still have a player above them. If your teammates are getting contested, it is your job to pressure the opponent as much as possible and try and get them to drop off of high ground. The next thing you want to be looking for is players with RPGs or the grappler, and make sure you pressure them as much as possible. You want to make sure your teammates know where these players are so that they can grief their games so that they don't grief yours. Next up, look for players that get cracked or are building out of wood and calm your teammates that they could be easy kills. If you do have a minigun or AR, pressure them with your teammates as much as possible. Also, when you're on height, you want to make sure that you're looking backward into storm for flopper players that could be trying to make a height play. You also want to shoot out as many launch pads as possible so nobody pads up onto your high ground. Finally, if you do see a loot pile, do everything you can to get as much loot as possible with your harpoon. If you are able to get just a couple of refreshes with your harpoon in an endgame and you're on height, you have absolutely no reason to lose that game. A support player's refreshes are one of the most important things in an endgame. Overall though guys, that will be all for the video. If you guys did enjoy, please slap a like on it. Every single like means a ton to me. If you guys do want to be notified when my fragger video drops, make sure you subscribe with notifications on. Finally, if you are competing in the FNCS solos or FNCS trios coming up, please do not wear crystal skin. That is the most ugly piece of shit in the game. As always though, good luck with your future tournaments. I love you all. I'm out. Peace.